Craigslist is not something I would use often. I mean, less than once a year for sure. But sometimes it's just the easiest way to sell something that would otherwise be impossible to sell quickly. However, after this happened to me about 3 years ago, I never used Craigslist again. I was 22 at the time and lived in a very small house with a roommate of mine for over a year before he moved out. The lease ended in a few months anyway, and without a roommate to split the rent with, I could no longer afford the property. Thus, I had to move out as well. It wasn't too hard to find an apartment, but it was way smaller than the house was. This meant that I pretty much needed to get rid of all of my furniture. The couch was basically unused, and my roommate and I bought it just over a year ago when he moved in. So it would be a total waste to just put it on the side of the road for someone to pick up. The thing was expensive, and I could really use any extra money to help with the move. So of course, I resorted to Craigslist. This was my first time ever selling anything on the site, as I was always the one to buy stuff instead. I'd never had any weird experiences aside from just the awkward feeling of being in someone else's house and meeting a stranger. Though, being the person selling this time, I felt much more comfortable since I would be at my house anyway. It took a bit over 2 weeks for someone who was seriously interested to reply to the ad and ask to come check it out. He ended up calling me to ask a few questions about it. Honestly, it made me feel better, since I assumed he was probably just trying to be safe and make sure I wasn't some creep. His name was David, and he told me that he moved into a new house and needed some cheap furniture to fill the space. I mentioned that I was in the exact opposite position, leaving my house for an apartment. He responded, asking politely why I was leaving, to which I told him that my roommate left, so I couldn't really afford it anymore. He sounded nice though, which, I guess, made me tell him more than I should have. We set a time after we were both off of work on a Saturday evening, around 6 o'clock. When that time came around, I left the front door open and waited. I sat on the couch for over an hour, just waiting for the guy to show up, before eventually shutting the front door and going to the kitchen to make some food, assuming he just bailed on me. But then the doorbell rang only minutes later. It was 7:30 at this point, so I was obviously a little upset, but I tried to fake a smile and open the door. "I'm David," he said as he held his hand out for a handshake. He was a tall, larger man with a very large grin on his face. I shook his hand and invited him inside, showing him into the living room. He looked at it for a second, nodding his head in approval, before I heard footsteps outside the front door, followed by an opening, and 2 more men walking inside. "Sorry, these are my buddies that are moving in with me. Hope you don't mind." "Oh, yeah, that's fine," I said nervously, knowing that there wasn't much I could do about it. Honestly, I was starting to get really uneasy though, and had a bad feeling in my gut. I tried to not think about it, telling myself I was overthinking it, but my feelings would not suppress. David walked to the other side of the couch and knelt down a bit, as if he was inspecting something. Then he stood back up. "What's this over here?" he said, pointing down at the side of the couch with the other 2 men standing behind me. I reluctantly walked over to where he was standing and looked down at the couch. "I don't see anything." He pointed again, as if he wanted me to get down and look. The 2 other men came closer, standing in front of me, while David was behind me. Slowly, I knelt down and looked at the side, still not seeing anything. I could feel all of them breathing over me, making me feel powerless and terrified. "I'm just messing with you." "There's nothing there," David exclaimed, giving me a hard pat on the back as I stood up. I let out a nervous chuckle and moved myself a few steps away. I could see the other men had creepy smiles on their faces as they looked at David, as if plotting something. I tried my best to remain calm and think of a way out of this situation, but they were in my house. I couldn't just leave, and I was too scared to ask them to leave.